Okay, today's daf is Ted Zayin. We're going to start on Ted Vav Amud Bet at the very bottom, last line really. So we talked about this idea of kilei zechuchit, that glassware. So what is the status of glassware? So we talked about how they made a gezerah, they made a decree that glassware should be subject to tum'ah, in the same way as earthenware is subject to tumah, even though really all of tumah v'tahora, all of the laws of purity and impurity are gezerot hakatuv. They are established only by what's written in the Torah, and it doesn't mention anything in the Torah about glass. But since it's made from earth, glass is made from earth, so we treat it like earthenware. And so the question was brought up, well, according to that, then they shouldn't be able to be purified in a mikveh, because you cannot purify earthenware in a mikveh, as we all know. And then the Gemara had answered that, well, in a case where it's broken, where the vessel is broken, and then it's repaired, welded together with metal, with some kind of metal or lead, so in such a case, there was actually so basically we had a contradiction. First we saw that in fact there is the possibility of dipping glass in the mikveh. So if we're treating it like earthenware, why is it that it says in the Mishnah parameters for dipping glassware in the mikveh? It doesn't make any sense. So the answer that they said was, well, in a case where the glass broke and then you put it back together using metal, so in those cases you would be able to dip it in the mikveh, because really what's holding it together is not the glass but the metal. But the assumption is that if it were purely glass, it would not be capable of being dipped in the mikveh. That's what the Gemara is assuming right now. Now, how exactly they did this, we don't know. Well, I don't know what they're envisioning, because I'm not a glass. Some kind of a welding with metal, but I'm not sure exactly how they did it. They said that they filled the hole in with lead to hold it together. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about glasswork to know.
Yeah. You have, let's say, metal things to hold it, but you have.
That's a frame.
Somehow it says that it's in. There's some metal that they put into it to hold it together. It is whole.
But either it was cracked.
It was cracked, and they used some hot. They put lead in there or some kind of metal that they melted down, and then it hardened there to hold the glass together. That's what it sounds like. What they mean.
There was a hole.
Sounds like that would break it.
Or they patched it up.
Definitely break it.
Right. Whatever it is, it somehow held the glass together. How they did it, I have no idea. I know. I don't know how they did it. I don't know. All right, so Elameataf. Now we're the last two words of the Amud Bet. So Elameataf. That's the case. That basically, what are we assuming now in the Gemara? That no, you cannot purify glass in a mikveh, because it's really like earthenware. There was just one unique case where there was one opinion, Rabbi Meir's opinion, that you could if it were filled with metal, but otherwise you can't. So Elameataf, that's the truth. Loli tamumi gaban. Then glass, if you have a glass bowl and something touches the outside of the bowl, not the airspace inside the bowl, but the outside, like the outside of the cup. So the halacha of kli cheres is, with earthenware, if tum'ah touches the outside surface, it doesn't make it tameh. Only the inner surface, only the airspace of the kli cheres is where it transmits tum'ah and where it receives tum'ah. That's another gezerat hakatuv. So
this has nothing to do with kosher.
How it will get tum'ah, like
something you would have to put your hand into it. Yeah. Then you would have. If you touch the outside, it wouldn't affect it. Only the inside. So Tanan. So Alama Tanan, if that's the truth, then why does it say in the Mishnah that Klei Cheres u Klei Neter Tumatan Shaveh, that it said that vessels of earthenware and vessels of neter, which is another type of earth. So tumatan shavah, that their tumah is the same. Mitamein umtamein me'avirehen, that they become tamei and they transmit tumah from their airspace. Umitamein me'achorehen ben mitamein b'gabehen. The way that Rashi interprets this is, for example, if you have a cup, a kiddush cup or something, it wouldn't be that's made of earthenware, like a one that's made of earthenware. So inside the cup is called avir. The avir of the cup is the inside, the part that you would put the liquid in. And then underneath, let's say it has like a base, and the base is also has a hole in it, right? Because sometimes the base has an opening in the bottom. Like if you look underneath, you'll see that the base is also open. It's shaped almost like an upside down cup. smaller upside down cup. So inside there also, that's me'achorehen, according to Rashi, there too. In other words, there has to be an airspace for the kli cheres to become tamei. So it can be either the airspace that you put the liquid in, or the underneath part, if there's a hole, if there's an opening there, that can also be a vehicle of tumah. But just touching the outside of the cup, like the side here, would not count as tumah for a kli cheres. Okay, and then it says ushviratan mitaratan, and also breaking a kli cheres is the only way you can purify it. If you break a kli cheres, you break the earthenware vessel, then it becomes tahor. Klei neder klei cheres hu detumatan shava aval midia harina lo. But the implication is that only earthenware, these two types of earthenware, are have these rules of tumah, but nothing else. Meaning glass doesn't follow these rules. And according to you, that you're saying that glass should be the same as earthenware, which means that you should only be able to make glass tameh from the inside of the cup or from underneath, but you shouldn't be able to make it tameh from the side. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Sure, like if you break it, let's say you break it, and a piece of what is broken, you can still use as a keli.
Right.
That
so
keli is
tahor now. It's tahor now.
Even if you can use it as
right. Even if you can still use it because you broke the identity of the.
In other words, what makes it tahor is not the fact that it's rendered unusable.
Unusable from its original use because you broke it, but now you can have it. You can take a piece and use it as a little bowl.
A completely different keli.
It's a new entity. Yeah, it's a new entity. It's another proof that the laws of tumah v'tahora are not physical. It's not a physical thing, because if there was something physically wrong with it, then just breaking it, it's the same. It's the same piece. It's a conceptual thing. So kevan. So they said amrei kevan then kinish dabru yeshlem takana shavinu kichlei matachot. That basically, since glass, if it's broken, it can be melted down and reshaped again. You can melt down glass and you can reshape it again. So therefore they treated it like metal in this respect. Okay, so they didn't purely treat it like earthenware. In certain respects it was treated like earthenware apparently, as we saw, because it comes from sand. But at the same time, we can't apply the rule that breaking it is going to purify it or anything like that, because since when it's broken, you can melt it down and reconstitute it. So we're not going to treat it precisely like earthenware. We're really going to treat it more like metal in certain ways, and we're going to say that it can become tameh even from the side, and that breaking it is not going to purify it. So these rules are going to follow the rules of metal kilim. But if that's the truth, that there's another halacha of klei matachot, which is that if you have a metal vessel and it's broken, when it's broken, it actually loses the tumah. But if you weld it back together, it becomes tameh again. In other words, as soon as you reconstitute it, it's tameh again. Why don't we apply that rule to glass then? Ditan, as we said in the Mishnah, when it comes to metal vessels, whether they're flat or they have a receptacle, tamein, they become tameh either way, through touching them from the outside, through the receptacle, it doesn't matter. Now, nishberu taru. If they become broken, they lose their identity, basically. So they lose their tum'ah. But chazar v'asam en kelim, chazul tumatan. But if you take the metal now and you reconstitute it, it's going to become tameh again as it was before. L'tumatan yishana. V'lo gabe klei zechuchit tanan. But with regard to glass, we said klei etz u klei or u klei etzem u klei zechuchit. That when it comes to wooden kelim, wooden vessels made of skin. Okay, animal skin. Klei etzem, boneware, or klei zechuchit, or glassware. What is the halacha? Pshutehen teorein, or mekablein temein. That only if they are shaped with a bet kibul, only if they have a receptacle, do they become tameh. But something flat, like a flat board of wood, cannot become tameh. A flat piece of glass cannot become tameh either. Like you take a window, can't become tameh. Only something that has a bet kibul, it has to have a container in it in order for it to become tameh. So that's not like metalware. Nishberu taharu, and if you break it, again, same principle. If you break it, it's going to be tahor. But chazar v'asam en kelim mikabelin tum'ah bikanu laba. From now on, they can become tameh. Bikanu laba in the mafreelo. So basically, there are lots of disparities here. So now we're saying that what was the original reason why they prohibited klei zechuchit? Why did they originally prohibit glassware, or make it subject to tumah? Because it's similar to klei cheres, because it's similar to earthenware. But many of the halachot don't follow that pattern. So, for instance, if you break a metal a vessel, okay, or rather, metal vessels can become tameh even from the outside. They don't have to become tameh from the inside. So in that respect, glass is the same. Glass can become tamei whether you touch the outside or you touch the inside. But it's also different from metalware, because metalware, if you break it and then you reconstitute it, now it gets the original tumah that it had before. Glassware, if you break it and you reconstitute it, it's tamei from now on. In other words, it can become tamei again, but whatever tumah it had before is gone. It doesn't regain the original tumah. So, for example, if it became tamei from touching a dead animal or something like that, and so you broke the glass, and now you take it to a glass worker and he melts it down and he makes it again, it's not going to be tamei now. It can become tamei again, but it's not going to regain the original tumah. Whereas if you had something metal that became tamei, and instead of taking it to the mikveh, you went and you had somebody melt it down and recreate it, it's going to become tamei just like it was before. So even though you broke it and then you soldered it back together, it's going to reawaken the tumah. It's going to come back. That doesn't happen with glass. So and similarly with glass, also instead of applying the rule of klei matachot that even a flat piece of metal like a tray could become tamei, in the case of glass, it has the rule that it has to have a beit kibul, it has to be something that has a receptacle. So you've got a lot of different rules in glass that don't seem to follow a pattern at all. So now we say like this, that really this whole concept of glassware being subject to tumah is only rabbinical to begin with. So v'tumah yishana d'Rabbanan. So, and the idea that when a metal vessel is broken and then it's reconstituted, that the tum'ah comes back, it springs back, that's also a rabbinical rule. So what happened was that betum'ah deoraita achitu barabanan, tum'ah betum'ah. Achitu barabanan tum'ah. When it came to a tum'ah deoraita, when it was metalware, that the metalware was tameh biblically. And then when it broke, it was tahor. And then when you reconstituted it, the rabbis came and made a rule that the tum'ah is going to spring back. That's for the biblical tum'ah. But betum'ah de rabbanan lo achitu la rabbanan tum'ah. But when it comes to rabbinical tum'ah, in other words, glassware, which even in the worst case, it's only rabbinically tameh. Because really, biblically, it doesn't have tumah at all. So therefore, when you break it and you reconstitute it, the rabbis didn't go so far as to cause the tumah to spring back and reawaken again.
Reconstitution for glass is melting it
down.
Blowing or
right, reblowing it, yeah. By metal, you start soldering it back, I guess, yeah.
Those are different kinds of reconstitution.
That's true. That's true.
They seem different.
That's true too. I mean, it seems like it seems like they're talking about just putting the pieces back together with the metal. As opposed to melting it down. That's true. It is different. So, but let's go back to the other thing. So now we understand why we made a distinction when it comes to tum'ah. Once you've broken the glass and you've blown the glass again and recreated it, we don't say that the tum'ah from before comes back again. Why? Because glassware is only rabbinically subject to tum'ah to begin with. So we're not going to put an additional rabbinic stringency and say that the tum'ah is going to spring back. However, why is it that why is it that the outside of a glass, okay, right, I was right the first time. Why isn't it that a flat glass is also subject to tum'ah, like metal? In other words, why is it that it requires a beit kibul, that it has to have some kind of a receptacle to become tameh? Why is it that a flat piece of glass is not subject to tumah? Because it seems like we're applying many of the rules of klei matachot. We're applying many of the rules of metal to glass. For example, touching the outside or the inside, it doesn't matter with glass. Both of them will make it tameh. So it's not like earthenware, it's like metal. So why is it that it requires a beit kibul at all? Why does it require a receptacle? So the pshutei klei matachot deoraita, because when it comes to metal, even a flat piece of metal that's a kli, like a tray or something like that, can become tameh. So avdei b'urabanan hekera ki'echid lo lesof alayo teruma v'kodashim. Basically, what the rabbis say is they wanted to make one rule in glass that was lenient in order to remind everybody that was only rabbinical. So if they were to treat it completely like metalware and say that even a flat piece of glass is subject to tum'ah, and it doesn't matter whether you touch the inside or the outside of it, it's going to be subject to tum'ah. In other words, if they applied all the rules of metalware to glassware, people would be confused and they would think that it was biblically prohibited or biblically subject to tum'ah, just like metal. So by making one exception to the rule, that it has to have a receptacle, Okay, that it can't be flat. So that shows that it's not really metalware, and it's also not really earthenware because it's not following the rules of earthenware either. Because you can make it tameh even from touching the outside. So it's not following the pattern of earthenware, and it's not following the pattern of metalware, which means it's neither of them. And by showing us that it's neither of them, by giving it its own rules, people will recognize that it's a rabbinic creation. These laws are a rabbinic creation, and therefore they won't burn terumah v'kodashim. What that means is that if terumah comes into one of these glass, there's a tameh glass, and you put some terumah in there, they're not going to burn it because of the tumah. They'll do what we said last time, tolin. They'll leave it. They won't use it because now it's rabbinically tameh, but they won't burn it, which would be violating a biblical prohibition. And the rabbis can come along and say that this terumah is tameh, but they can't come and tell you to burn the terumah that they said was tameh, because they're not allowed to tell you to violate a biblical prohibition of burning terumah, and in reality, in the biblical reality, that terumah is tahor. They came along and said it was tameh rabbinically by making the glass tameh rabbinically. They made the terumah tameh rabbinically. But they don't want you to burn that terumah because that would be violating min haTorah. That would be violating a biblical rule. So therefore they shaped, so to speak, the laws of glassware so that it's obvious that it's not metalware and it's not really earthenware. It doesn't follow the rules of either category, and it's only rabbinical. And we turn to Amud Bet. Rav Ashi says, you know what? I'm going to solve all of these problems with one answer instead of this complicated answer. What's my answer? Le'olam le'klei cheres damo. Really, it is we treat it like earthenware. It's rabbinical, but we treat it like earthenware. Why then do we have these? So, and as Rashi says, like we said originally, since it's created from dirt, from sand, and this explains, as Rashi says, why flat glass would not be subject to tumah, because it's similar to earthenware, where it has to have an airspace to be subject to tumah. This also explains why when you break glass and you reconstitute it, it doesn't reawaken the original tumah that it had. So if you take a tameh glass and you break it and you melt it down and recreate it, it doesn't have the same tumah that it had before. Just like earthenware, if you broke the earthenware and you were able to put it back together, it wouldn't reawaken the tumah. That's only with metal. That's only with metal. So Rav Ashi says I can explain most of the halachot by comparing it to earthenware. What's the one problem with the kakashialach? So what was the only thing that doesn't really fit? There was really only one halacha about glass that doesn't fit with earthenware, and that is that when you touch the outside of the glass, it also makes it tameh. That's the only thing about glass that doesn't follow the pattern of earthenware. So you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say because it's glass, you can see right through it. So really it would just be the inside, like earthenware. But since it's glass and it's therefore transparent, so we say that touching the outside is the same as touching the inside, because normally when you have earthenware and you touch the outside, you don't even see the inside. Where you're touching is it's solid. But when it's glass, since you can see right through, they treated the inside and the outside as the same. So Rav Ashi basically solves all the problems by saying we're going to just say it's earthenware. And the only exception to the rule of earthenware is we don't need to say that it's a hybrid, so to speak, between metal and earthenware, where some things follow the rule of metal and some things don't follow the rule of metal, some things follow the rule of earthenware. We're going to say it all follows the rule of earthenware. The only exception is that touching the outside makes it tameh, and the reason for that is because it's a different type of earthenware item, because you can see right through it, because it's transparent. That's where, now everybody still agrees this is rabbinical in nature. Shimon ben Shattach tiken ketubah leisha. We said that Shimon ben Shattach established ketubah for a woman, v'gazar tum'ah al kalei matachot. And he also decreed impurity on metal vessels. What do you mean? Kalei matachot deoraita? What are you talking about? He decreed that metal vessels can become tameh? That's from the Torah. Because it says by Kalei Midian, when they brought all of the vessels back from the war of Midian, when they were going to purify them, it lists all of the different types of metals. So obviously metal is subject to impurity. So what does it mean that Shimon ben Shattach established the idea of impurity for metal kelim? We're going back to this idea of tumah yishana. He was the one that decreed that if you have a metal item that became tameh and then you break it, even though biblically now it's tahor because you broke it, if you put it back together, it's going to become tameh just like it was before. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, because Rav Yehuda says that Rav says Maaseh b'Shel Tzion HaMalka. Once upon a time, the Jewish queen B'Shel Tzion, her name was Shel Tzion HaMalka. That there was a situation with her with Shel Tzion HaMalka. She'asta mishteh livna, that she made a wedding for her son. And somehow there was a mess up, and all of the metal vessels at the wedding became tameh. And back then, people wouldn't eat. They wouldn't eat things that were tameh because they were going in the Beit HaMikdash all the time. They were dealing with teruma all the time. They were dealing with foods that had to be kept tahor all the time, especially the chachamim. So nobody's going to come to this wedding. So what did she do? So ushvaratan untanatan letzoref. So what she did was she broke all of them, and then she gave them to a metal worker, v'ritchan, and he welded them back together. V'asamen kilim chadashim, and he made from them. So he heated them up and he put them back together.
But that's different.
That's
different than one keli versus.
No, it says Rashi says v'ritchan means that he actually just welded them back together, or soldered them back together. Is what he did. Yeah, and he made kilim chadashim. So he made new vessels out of them. So biblically speaking, what would the halacha be? This would be tahor because you broke it; it lost the tumah.
Wait, so yeshana is
yeshana is sleeping. It's not sleeping. It's yeshana.
Yeshana is biblical. Is not.
No, if you break the kli, it loses its tum'ah biblically.
But if
you put it back together, it doesn't come back.
It does.
Biblically, it doesn't come back.
So that's rabbinic.
That's rabbinic. Yeah. So that's what happened. So she thought, I'm a genius now, because what would happen so Rashi says that this is a situation where there was tumat mit involved, which meant that what would happen with these kelim? She would have had to wait for 3 days for haza'ah shlishi u'shvi'i, because in order to purify something from tumat mit, it takes at least 7 days. You have to wait 3 days, put the para aduma ashes on that, wait another few days till the 7th day, put para aduma ashes, and then take it to the mikveh. She didn't have time. The wedding was now. She doesn't have time for that. So she needed a quick fix. So she broke the kelim, thinking, okay, biblically now they're pure, put them back together, no problem. However, the rabbi said, they said, no, they're going to now become tameh again. Oh, that's really nice. It's not something you would usually do to a queen, but apparently they did. What was the reason? Mishum geder mechatat naguba. Because of mechatat. What does that mean? What it means is that if you were to be able to purify kelim simply by breaking them and putting them back together, nobody would ever do the para aduma anymore. They would lose the concept of the mechatat. They would lose the concept of para aduma, except for people, obviously. You can't break people and put them back together. But vessels, the idea that vessels require the ashes of the para aduma would be lost, because what would people do? Nobody's going to go through a 7-day process. If they can just break it and put it back together, it's much easier. Now, you're saying that the whole reason why they made this gezerah, that if you break the kelim and you put them back together, they become tameh again, their tum'ah springs back. So that makes sense, according to the one who says that they only decreed that in the case of tumat met, in the case where the kelim, these vessels, were tameh from a dead body. Because you're saying that the reason why they made this rule was so that the idea of the para aduma won't be lost. And if people can just break things and put them back together in one day, why would they wait 7 days? So that makes sense if the gezerah only applied when the metal vessels were tameh from a dead body. But according to the ones that say that, they said this about all tumot, that any tum'ah that the metal vessel acquires cannot be removed by breaking it if you put it back together again. So then it doesn't make sense that they would make such a broad sweeping gezerah and say that anytime you break a vessel and put it back together, the tum'ah is going to come back just to protect the para aduma. Why does it have to apply to every kind of tum'ah then? It should only apply to tumat met. So Amar Abaye says, Gezerah Shema lo yikovenu b'chtei tahorato. Abaye says it's a gezerah because when you break this vessel, how much breaking is necessary? You have to break it to the point that it's really not usable the original way anymore. And a person who's just doing it, it's one thing if you did it once in a while. But if a person is going to do this all the time, it's going to become standard. They're going to be breaking it. They're not going to break it so much because who wants to bring it to the guy to fix it again? They're just going to break it minimally and say, "Hey, look, I broke it."
Back to the issue that I brought. What if you break it and part of it is usable,
right.
but part of it is not.
Right, there's a matter of degree. So Rava Amar Gezerah Shema Yomru Tevila Bat Yoma Olala. So according to Rava, there's another reason here, and this is the reason that actually is brought down in the halacha, that basically if a person were to do this, in other words, to break things and put them back together, so what's going to happen when you normally bring something to the mikveh? You brought something today to the mikveh. It doesn't fully become tahor until tonight. You have to have, remember we said yesterday, you have to wait till the day ends. So what will happen if a person can break the metal vessel and rebuild it in the same day, put it back together in the same day? They're going to they're going to think, so then if I bring it to the mikveh and I dip it, I can also use it right away. Because if I break it and I put it back together, I can use it right away. I don't have to wait till later. So if I dip it in the mikveh, I should also be able to use it right away and not wait till later. And because people will confuse the two processes. Because in one case, the breaking and reconstituting, the tum'ah is like eliminated. It's not a process of purification. It's that the tum'ah disappears when you break it. So it's gone. When you dip it in the mikveh, it's a process. The process is first you dip, and then at nightfall, the tum'ah fades away, so to speak. But people will confuse the two processes, and they won't understand the difference between them. So, my benayu, what's the difference whether we say that the reason why they decreed this idea that putting a metal vessel back together brings the tum'ah back? What's the difference if we say that it's because people won't break it enough, or if we say it's because people will confuse it with mikveh and will think that mikveh is also instantaneous and you don't have to wait? So it says, "Ika benayu diratzefinu miratzaf," that the difference between the two is whether you is when in a case where you completely shattered it, when you completely broke it. So what does Rashi say here? He explains that herikan v'shivran kulan, that if you completely break it, in other words, you totally smash it. So why is that the difference? Because shema lo yikovenu leka, because you don't have to worry maybe he's not going to break it enough, because he shatters it completely. Okay, V'shema yomeru ika, but you could still be concerned that people will get the misimpression that dipping in the mikveh is instantaneous. Because what difference does it make if you shattered it or not? Okay, ve'ika da amri. Some people say the opposite. Shema lo yikovenu ika, shema yomeru leka. Da minkar asiyah shenitchadesh kulo. That basically what he says is that, and this is the interpretation that he favors, that if you completely destroyed the kli. Okay, you completely pulverize it or whatever. So it's we don't have to. We could still be concerned that somebody else who also wants to break their vessel won't break it as much, and therefore it won't really work. So we still have that concern. But the concern of a person who's going to say, maybe the mikveh works instantaneously, just like breaking it and reconstituting it works instantaneously, we're not worried about that. Because here, it's really like you created something new. You totally destroyed it and put it back together. Nobody's going to mistake that for somebody dipping it in the mikveh. Everyone's going to see this is a new entity. And therefore, in a case where it was totally destroyed and put back together, it wasn't just broken, but it was really totally destroyed, there, according to Rava, it wouldn't be as much of a problem, because people are going to see this as very different. If you're looking at it as a concern for how much people break things, are people going to break it enough, then we still have to be concerned. Maybe they won't break it enough. Just because this one guy totally pulverized it doesn't mean everybody's going to do the same. It's a matter of degree. But if you look at it from the perspective of Rava, that the concern here is that a person who sees someone break a vessel and put it back together is going to think that just like that works instantaneously, dipping in the mikveh works instantaneously, here he's not going to make a mistake, because he's going to realize that pulverizing and reconstituting is really creating something totally new. It's not like dipping it in the mikveh. So that's the way that the Gemara concludes.
It's quite a while.
That's true too, yeah.
He doesn't seem very sure about it.
Yeah, but then he says that's what I think. Yeah, that's what he thinks. Ve'idach, what is the next one of these gezerot? Now remember, ve'idach ma'hi, so we're talking about all these different gezerot, all of these different rules that were passed in these debates between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, with regard to these 18 items. So we're trying to count up what are all of these items, and the next one is it says in the Mishnah, if a person, if you were to put vessels next to a pipe in order to receive in them rainwater, that if you put vessels under the drain pipe or some kind of pipe, even if whether they're big or small, whether they're made of stone or of earth or even of dung, it doesn't matter what they're made of, that water that you captured, according to Beit Shammai, whether you left it there on purpose or you forgot it there. In other words, you left something under the drain pipe and it turns out it filled with rainwater. And now that rainwater gets in a mikveh, it ends up in a mikveh. So you collected the water. It's like mayim she'uvim. It's like drawing water because you collected it in a vessel. So putting it into the mikveh, if the mikveh is not completely full yet, remember, if the mikveh is already full, then even if you put mayim she'uvim, even if you put drawn water in, it doesn't invalidate it. But if it's not up to its measurement yet, and you put it in mayim she'uvim, and you put in drawn water, it can invalidate the mikveh. So what Beit Shammai is saying is, since you collected this water in a vessel, even if you forgot the vessel there and it was accidental, still it's collected in a vessel, it's going to invalidate the mikveh. What does Beit Hillel say? Beit Hillel mitaharin b'shocheach. Beit Hillel say, you know what, if you put it there on purpose, I agree. That's really, mayim she'uvim. You really drew the water. You collected water. But if you just left the vessel there by accident and it collected water, it wasn't really drawn by a human action because you didn't intend to do it. So if that falls into the mikveh, it's not going to invalidate it as mayim she'uvim. Rabbi Meir says, Nimnu v'Rabbu Beit Shammai al Beit Hillel, that Beit Shammai, they took a vote, and Beit Shammai outvoted Beit Hillel. Umodim Beit Shammai b'shochech b'chatzer shu tahor. But even Beit Shammai agrees that if you left it in the courtyard, in other words, if you leave it right next to the drain pipe and you forgot it there, it's positioned to receive the water that comes down from the rain. So there, Beit Shammai is going to say that's collecting water. However, if you leave it in the middle of the yard and all of a sudden it rains, you didn't even remember that you left a bowl out in the yard and it rained on it. That's not considered that you really came and collected water in that way. So it's because it's not under the spot where the water normally falls. It's just in the middle of your yard. And then Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Adayin machloket bimkoma omedet, that actually even there they still argue. Even there they still argue. That's not true that if you leave it in the middle of the yard and you forgot it there, that Beit Shammai is going to say it's okay if it fills with rainwater. He's still going to say it's not. Amar Rav Shasha says, Devei Rav Amrei, in the yeshiva of Rav they said, Hakol modim kishinachan b'shat kishur avim temeim, b'shat pizur avim divrei hakol teorein. So he comes up with a compromise here. He says like this: everybody agrees if you leave the bowl in the backyard, okay, in the courtyard, you left the bowl there when it was cloudy and it looked like it was about to rain, and you forgot it there. Everybody agrees that's really like gathering the rain because there was reason to believe that the rain was going to fall. If it's a sunny day and there's not a cloud in the sky and you left a bowl in the backyard, okay, and when you left it there was no reason to even think about rain, and then all of a sudden there's a flash flood and it fills with rain, there everybody agrees it's not considered that you gathered the water because there was no connection between your leaving of the bowl and the water. There was no sign of rain. Lo nechleku ele shehinichan b'shat kishur avim v'nitpazru v'chazru v'nitkashru. Where is there room for a machloket? Where is there room for an argument? Where when you forgot the bowl, it was cloudy. So at that moment, you could have thought to yourself, hey, this bowl might end up filling with water because I'm leaving it in the backyard and it's cloudy. But then the sun came out, the clouds dispersed, it was blue sky, it was beautiful outside, and then the clouds came back. So your original thought when you left the bowl there originally, under circumstances where it looked like it might rain, that original thought in a way was canceled out. Because then the clouds left. But then they came back. So the beginning and the end there was clouds, but in the middle there were sunny skies. So it's as if whatever your original connection was to the rain that would come down was kind of broken.
Did the person know that it cleared
They didn't know what they knew that it cleared up. Right.
The last thing the person knew,
Weather
it was
report.
cloudy.
Right. It was cloudy when they left the bowl.
Right. And
then it became sunny.
But they didn't know that.
Well, they probably did because they probably looked at the sky and saw. But still, yeah.
In other words,
Right.
they're ruling out even negligence,
Right.
as opposed to just.
It's a kind of it's really is there a connection between your leaving of the bowl and the actual rainfall? So in a way there isn't a connection because this is a new set of clouds. You know, it was the original clouds that were there. They disperse. So that's exactly what the machloket is. So Mar Safar one says, but lama chashavto, that the machshava is eliminated. In other words, it is because the clouds dispersed. Umar Safar lo, but lama chashavto, and one says no, the clouds dispersing because in the beginning and the end, at least. Everything is, everything works out the way it originally was. When he left the bowl originally, it was cloudy. Now it's cloudy again and it rains. So even though in the middle there was an interruption, still beginning and end, it was raining. Or it was cloudy. So we don't eliminate we don't say because there was an interposition of sunny skies that it cancels its original thought. Rabbi Yossi. And according to Rabbi Yossi, Damar machloket adayin bimkoma umedet. According to Rabbi Yossi, even in this case, they have a machloket. In other words, even in the case where it's left in the chatzer, even in the case where it's left in the yard, it's still a machloket. So Batzrelo, he's going to be missing one of the 18 gezerot. He's going to be missing one of the 18 gezerot. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Af benot kutim lidot ne'ari satan bo bayom gazru. There was one other gezerah that he will include in this, that Beit Shammai decreed that the daughters of the Kutim were a group called the Samaritans today that didn't follow Torah Shebaal Peh so carefully. There were some things that was overlap with the Jewish practice and some things that they were not. So they considered all daughters of the Kutim to be nidot from birth. Why? Because the Kutim, even though they followed biblical law, they didn't consider nida. If a girl who was under the age of adulthood would have a flow of nida, which could happen occasionally, it's rare, but it could happen. They wouldn't have considered that to be tum'ah, and they wouldn't have been careful for her not to come into contact with things that were tahor. So the rabbis had to say that any girl, even though she's a newborn practically, they had to assume that they were nidot because they couldn't assume that the kutim were careful about recognizing nida in a girl. And a girl who was under bat mitzvah age. So this is the so that would be the additional gezerah, the additional decree according to Rabbi Yossi that will make up for the decree that he says doesn't exist, because he says that Beit Shammai did not actually outvote Beit Hillel with regard to putting the person who leaves the bowl under the drain pipe, and because he didn't, so that can't be one of the 18 gezerot. So he replaces it with the gezerah about the kutim and the hilchot nida. Have a good night.